We're ready. Snap. Hi, my name is Catherine Opie. I'm an artist. One of the ongoing relationship that keeps happening with all the bodies of work is ideas of identity, and how do we look at it, and how do we think about structure and identity in the same way. And so I'm always going into thinking about buildings as bodies and bodies as buildings. The body of work, Walls, Windows, and Blood, that I'm going to be showing at Lehmann Maupin was made during a residency at the American Academy in Rome. You know, you take a year off of teaching and you don't expect it to be a pandemic year, but that's what happened to me. And what happened was the Vatican was empty. I always wanted to have a conversation with the Vatican about the Vatican and think about it as a place. And the specificity of the place ties in with the idea of specificity of identity in relationship to how I've looked at other bodies of work, such as American cities or freeways or even my own queer community. And so the specificity of identity of the Vatican ended up being distilled down to a body of work of Walls, Windows, and Blood. And so these three components are my Holy Trinity. By taking something that is as iconic as the Vatican, just literally like loaded with the most kind of poignant history of Christianity and idea of faith and its relationship to humanity, like, is that true? Is it false? What is the structure within it? How do we begin to think about the structure as also being explicitly part of its own doctrine of faith and notions around that? Where is the public and the private? How do queers talk about the public and private in relationship to a history of Christianity? So this is a lot of what my process is like as an artist, is to answer these larger questions, but begin to try to simplify them through the structure of the way that I make images. Windows, for instance. So right away you're mapping. You don't know if you're going to use all the windows, but you end up saying, well, these are the rules right now. I'm going to make every single photograph of every window inside the Vatican Museum looking out. The other thing that windows stand in for is transparency, the relationship of cultural transparency. So we're using this language all the time in relationship to how institutions are looked at today. In some of the images, the city of Rome ends up inside the Vatican. Does that in itself all of a sudden puncture the relationship of the outside and the inside? So using these different components and just purely observational photography allows me to reach for deeper metaphors within the work. One of the things that also I think about this body of work that's really important is the relationship to the idea of the camera as an apparatus. That the window in itself is an apparatus because of the way that light will stream through on any given day, in the same way that the walls are also a camera and an apparatus because of the security cameras on them that you're being surveyed. I ended up taking 3 cameras. One of them was an X-Pan made by Hasselblad, which is a panoramic camera for 35 millimeter. And so I wanted to systematically begin to photograph the walls like I had American cities. I thought about the panorama, the idea of expanse. And then as I was making them, all of a sudden I switched that panoramic to vertical one day, and I was like, oh, I've never done that before. And then I was looking at the exteriors of the walls of the in points and the end points where they vacillate in and out. And I realized that I didn't need to wrap you around the whole Vatican wall as a panorama, that I needed to have these inflection points, these ins and these outs. And so if I'm thinking of the windows as an apparatus, and I'm thinking of the walls as an apparatus, I think about the grid and the blood as a taxonomy of the meaning of what is instilled within the idea of the body, so that the window and the walls are also structures in a certain way, but it's not the body, it's not the human flesh, it's not the relationship to Christianity and the story of Christ. The blood in a certain way is a way for you to understand the history of the Bible through representation of these great artists who painted frescoes and so forth inside the Vatican. But one of the things is, in the way that you walk through the Vatican, the story is always told the same way. I have things borrowed from all parts of the museum where all of a sudden I'm telling my own story. And so this kind of is able to mess with people and their beloved stories a little bit to say, well, what is a story? How do we structure this? And why is this story the only way that we think of this history? Is this history correct? How do we think about truth in a post-truth era right now? The body of work is just to capitulate that, but again, for my own satisfaction and as an artist to go like, okay, well, I can take something like the Vatican, that is one of the most iconic places in the world to go to, and I can actually make you think about it and restructure it in your own mind and bring up your own questions that you might have by simply creating something called Walls, Windows, and Blood.